Starting with number 1 Convair XF-82A, United States, 1948. The XF-82A was America's first delta-wing jet aircraft, designed to test radical aerodynamic concepts that Convair hoped would define the next generation of interceptors. Built as a research vehicle rather than a combat-ready platform, it flew out of Muroc Dry Lake in California under highly controlled conditions. The stubby, cone-nosed airframe looked ungainly on the ground, and in the air it proved even more difficult. Pilots reported dangerously poor low-speed handling and unpredictable stall behavior, making every landing a controlled gamble. The program produced no viable fighter and consumed years of development funding. Yet its failures quietly shaped every delta wing design that followed. 2. McDonnell XF-85 Goblin, United States, 1948. Few aircraft in American history looked as absurd as the XF-85 Goblin, a tiny parasite fighter designed to be carried inside the bomb bay of a Convair B-58 and released mid-flight to defend the bomber against enemy interceptors. Barely 14 feet long, with a strange egg-shaped fuselage and folding swept wings, the Goblin was visually ridiculous and operationally worse. Test pilots struggled violently to rehook the aircraft onto the trapeze mechanism during retrieval, and in one incident the canopy was smashed against the trapeze bar, injuring the pilot. With a top speed too low to catch contemporary jet fighters and a retrieval system too dangerous for combat use, the program was canceled after only 7 test flights, leaving the B-58 without the protection its designers had promised. 3. Northrop YB-49, United States, 1948. The YB-49 was a flying wing bomber that looked decades ahead of its time, a smooth, tailless aircraft with no fuselage and no vertical stabilizers, relying entirely on its blended wing structure for lift and stability. In theory, it was elegant. In practice, it was aerodynamically unstable at the speeds and altitudes required for strategic bombing, and the early control systems of the late 1940s simply could not compensate. During a high-speed structural test flight in June 1948, the aircraft broke apart in midair over the Mojave Desert, killing all 5 crew members, including Captain Glenn Edwards, after whom Edwards Air Force Base was later named. A second prototype was lost to a ground accident shortly after. The Air Force, shaken by the losses and frustrated by the aircraft's inability to maintain a stable bombing platform, canceled the program entirely. 4. Republic XF-103, United States, 1956. Republic Aviation spent years developing the XF-103, an interceptor designed to reach Mach 3 and destroy Soviet bombers before they could reach American cities. The design called for a combined turbojet and ramjet propulsion system, a titanium airframe to survive extreme aerodynamic heating, and an enclosed cockpit with periscopic vision, since no conventional canopy could withstand the temperatures involved. Pilots would have flown blind, relying entirely on instruments and a periscope to see the outside world. The propulsion system never functioned reliably. The titanium construction proved prohibitively expensive, and after consuming over $100 million, the program was canceled in 1957 before a single prototype ever flew. It remains one of the most expensive American aircraft programs to fail without producing a single airframe. 5. Vought F7U Cutlass, United States, 1951. The F7U Cutlass was the U.S. Navy's attempt to field a swept-wing, tailless carrier jet in the early 1950s, and from the moment it entered service, it earned a reputation among naval aviators as one of the most dangerous aircraft ever put on an American flight deck. The twin-engine design sat at an unusually high nose-up angle on the ground, giving it a distinctive but deeply impractical posture that contributed to catastrophically high accident rates during carrier landings. The Westinghouse J-46 engines were chronically underpowered and unreliable, and the aircraft's hydraulic flight control system was prone to failure without warning. Of the 320 Cutlasses built, 25% were lost in accidents. At least 4 test pilots and numerous production pilots were killed, and the aircraft was formally withdrawn from frontline service by 1959. Pilots openly called it the gutless Cutlass and lobbied to be reassigned to any other platform available. 6. Convair F-102 Delta Dagger, United States, 1956. The F-102 Delta Dagger entered development as America's first supersonic interceptor, intended to intercept and destroy Soviet nuclear bombers over the Arctic approaches to North America. The original design, however, could not break the sound barrier in level flight, a failure so embarrassing that Convair engineers were forced to apply the newly developed area rule concept, reshaping the fuselage into a distinctive wasp waist profile before the aircraft could meet its basic performance requirement. Even after modification, the Delta Dagger was considered underpowered and difficult to fly, with a tendency toward adverse yaw that caught inexperienced pilots off guard. During the Vietnam War, where it served in an air defense role it was never designed for, F-102s were occasionally scrambled against North Vietnamese aircraft and proved poorly suited for the task, lacking the agility required for aerial combat in a dynamic threat environment. Several were lost to ground fire and operational accidents during that conflict. 7. Douglas F-4D Skyray, United States, 1956. The F-4D Skyray was a dramatically styled delta-wing carrier interceptor that looked extraordinary on paper, capable of climbing faster than any other American naval aircraft of its era. In combat conditions, however, its promise rapidly dissolved. The aircraft's range was alarmingly short, barely adequate for meaningful fleet defense missions, and its single Pratt & Whitney J57 engine, while powerful, made the airframe unforgiving in the hands of less experienced pilots. The Skyray had virtually no straight-wing stability reference points, meaning pilots transitioning from conventional aircraft faced a steep and dangerous learning curve. The aircraft served briefly with the Navy and Marines, but was rendered obsolete almost immediately by faster, more capable designs, spending the bulk of its career on alert duty rather than seeing meaningful operational use. 8. Lockheed F-104 Starfighter, United States, 1958. The F-104 Starfighter was designed with a singular, almost brutal philosophy: sacrifice everything for speed. The result was an aircraft with razor-thin wings barely measuring 7 inches in chord depth, a needle-like fuselage, and a thrust-to-weight performance that was genuinely revolutionary. It was also extraordinarily difficult to fly and punishingly unforgiving of pilot error. The ejection seat on early models fired downward, meaning that at low altitude, ejecting was effectively a death sentence. West Germany, which operated the Starfighter extensively under NATO arrangements throughout the 1960s, lost 292 aircraft and 116 pilots in accidents, earning the jet the grim nickname the Widowmaker and the Flying Coffin in the German press. The scandal surrounding its procurement and its catastrophic accident rate triggered a major political crisis in West Germany. American pilots who flew the aircraft respected its performance, but acknowledged that it demanded absolute precision at all times, leaving no margin for the ordinary mistakes that pilots of other jets could survive. 9. Convair B-58 Hustler, United States, 1960. The B-58 Hustler was America's first operational supersonic bomber, a sleek, delta-winged aircraft capable of reaching Mach 2 at altitude, and it looked like the future of strategic air power when it entered service with Strategic Air Command. The reality of operating it proved far more sobering. The aircraft's crew of 3 was confined in separate, individually pressurized capsules with minimal coordination between positions, and the cockpit workload during supersonic flight was described by crews as nearly overwhelming. Fuel consumption at high speed was so extreme that the B-58's practical combat radius was far shorter than the distances required to reach most Soviet targets from American bases. The aircraft suffered a disproportionately high accident rate throughout its service life, losing approximately 26 of 116 aircraft built, and SAC crews privately expressed deep anxiety about its operational reliability. It was retired in 1970 after only a decade of service, replaced by the B-52 it was supposed to supersede. 10. Northrop F-89 Scorpion, United States, 1952. The F-89 Scorpion was designed as a long-range, all-weather interceptor to guard American airspace against Soviet bomber formations penetrating through the Arctic, and it carried one of the most unusual weapon systems ever fitted to an American aircraft: unguided Mighty Mouse folding fin rockets fired in massive salvos intended to saturate a bomber formation. The logic was sound on paper. In practice, the Scorpion was heavy, sluggish, and aerodynamically mediocre, struggling to reach the altitudes and speeds of the bombers it was designed to intercept. One of the most disturbing moments in its operational history came in 1956, when an F-89 fired an unguided Air-2 Genie nuclear rocket during a live test over Nevada, detonating a 1.5 kiloton nuclear warhead above a group of Air Force volunteers standing on the desert floor in an exercise to demonstrate the weapon's safety. The psychological impact of that test on the crews involved was never fully documented. The Scorpion was phased out of frontline service by the early 1960s. 11 Bell XS-1X-1 program derivatives, United States, early 1950s. While the original X-1 achieved immortality by breaking the sound barrier in 1947, the expanded X-1 research program produced several derivatives that pushed pilots into conditions the aircraft and their own bodies could barely survive. The X-1A, flown by Chuck Yeager in December 1953, reached Mach 2.44 before entering a violent, uncontrolled tumble from which Yeager barely recovered at low altitude, the aircraft spinning through 51,000 feet of violent gyration before he regained control seconds before impact. The program exposed fundamental gaps in aeronautical knowledge about inertial coupling, a phenomenon where high-speed rotation in one axis fed catastrophically into others, and several subsequent X-Series research pilots were nearly killed before engineers understood what was happening. The cost of that knowledge was measured in destroyed aircraft, shattered confidence, and careers ended by the physical and psychological toll. 12 Grumman F-11F Tiger, United States, 1956. The F-11F Tiger holds one of the more peculiar distinctions in aviation history. It is one of the few aircraft ever to shoot itself down. In September 1956, during a test flight over Long Island, a Tiger fired a burst from its 20mm cannon and then, flying faster than the projectiles had slowed, flew through its own gunfire and was struck by multiple rounds. The pilot landed the damaged aircraft safely, but the incident captured the fundamental contradiction embedded in the Tiger's design. It was fast enough to outrun its own weapons, but not fast enough, nor versatile enough, to compete with the next generation of naval fighters. It served briefly with the Blue Angels demonstration team before being replaced by the F-8 Crusader. Its operational career effectively over before it had truly begun. 13 McDonnell F-101 Voodoo, United States, 1957. The F-101 Voodoo began life as a long-range escort fighter for Strategic Air Command bombers, a mission that was canceled before the aircraft entered production. The airframe was then repurposed first as a tactical nuclear strike aircraft and later as an interceptor, neither role a natural fit for the original design. The Voodoo was genuinely fast, capable of exceeding Mach 1.7, but it was notoriously difficult to handle at low speeds and during carrier approaches, with a deep stall characteristic that gave pilots almost no warning before the aircraft became unrecoverable. A series of fatal accidents during training and operational service reinforced its dangerous reputation, and pilots assigned to the type were acutely aware that the aircraft's margins for error were narrower than almost anything else in the inventory. 14 North American F-107 Ultra Sabre, United States, 1956. The F-107 Ultra Sabre was one of the most visually distinctive American fighters of the 1950s, featuring an air intake mounted directly above and behind the cockpit, a configuration that gave it an almost alien appearance and raised immediate concerns about pilot survivability during ejection. If a pilot needed to eject at high speed, the intake position directly above the seat would almost certainly consume the ejecting pilot before the parachute could deploy. Despite genuine performance credentials, including a top speed exceeding Mach 2, the Air Force selected the Republic F-105 Thunderchief instead, and only 3 F-107 prototypes were ever built. The intake placement alone was considered disqualifying for a production combat aircraft, a reminder that sometimes good performance cannot compensate for fundamentally dangerous design choices. 15 Lockheed YF-12, United States, 1963. The YF-12 was the interceptor variant of the legendary Blackbird family, capable of sustained flight above Mach 3 and designed to carry the AN-47 Falcon missile against Soviet bombers at extreme altitudes and speeds. It was technologically extraordinary and operationally nightmarish. At Mach 3, the airframe reached skin temperatures exceeding 500 degrees Fahrenheit. The fuel systems behaved unpredictably, and the infrared sensors on the missiles struggled to acquire targets in the thermal environment generated by the aircraft's own heat signature. Crews flying the YF-12 operated under conditions of extreme physiological stress, wearing full pressure suits and enduring sustained G-forces combined with intense heat management demands. The program was canceled in 1968 with only 3 aircraft built, its operational potential never matched by the systems required to exploit it. 16. Convair F-106 Delta Dart, United States, 1959. The F-106 Delta Dart was, by most measures, a genuine achievement, faster and more capable than its F-102 predecessor, serving as the primary interceptor of Air Defense Command for nearly 3 decades. Yet it earned its place in the history of troubled aircraft through one extraordinary incident. In February 1970, a pilotless F-106 entered an inverted flat spin during a training flight over Montana after its pilot ejected. Rather than crashing, the aircraft recovered from the spin on its own, descended gently, and landed itself in a snow-covered field with minimal damage, a sequence so improbable that it became known as the Cornfield Bomber. The incident inadvertently exposed how unstable the aircraft's spin characteristics truly were in certain flight regimes and prompted immediate review of recovery procedures across the Delta Dart fleet. 17. Republic F-105 Thunderscreech, United States, 1958. The F-105 Thunderscreech was designed as a supersonic tactical nuclear strike aircraft, built to fly fast and low, penetrate Soviet air defenses, and deliver a single nuclear weapon before escaping at high speed. It was the largest single-engine combat aircraft in American history, and when the Vietnam War forced it into a conventional strike role it was never designed for, the consequences were devastating. Flying the Rolling Thunder bombing campaigns against heavily defended targets in North Vietnam, F-105 crews faced some of the most intense anti-aircraft fire and surface-to-air missile threats ever encountered by American aviators. Of the 833 F-105s built, 334 were lost in combat and operational accidents during Vietnam, a loss rate so severe that the aircraft's dedicated units, the 355th and 388th Tactical Fighter Wings, were nicknamed the Thud Drivers by their own crews, a term of dark solidarity born from shared awareness of the odds. Pilots who flew it respected its speed and payload capacity, but understood with clarity that in the skies over Hanoi, it was flying a mission profile that had been written to kill it. If you think we missed an aircraft that deserves a place among the worst of the Cold War, let us know in the comments below. And for more military aviation history, failed aircraft projects, and Cold War documentaries, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.